birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month we extend happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. That's anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This, as ever, is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. And hey, if you've just found our show, climb aboard, plenty of room on the trolley. If you're a regular listener, we are glad to have you back. 80 years ago, with World War II raging, the faithful on the home front turned to the cinema for uplift, inspiration, and reminders of what we were fighting for in America. One picture that checked these boxes and also provided an entertaining diversion from wartime worries was a Technicolor treat by MGM, the Dream Factory famous for its fantastic musicals. And one of its crown jewels in the song and dance subgenre it monopolized proved to be Meet Me in St. Louis, directed by Vincent Minnelli and starring Judy Garland, originally released on November 28, 1944, just in time for the Christmas season. For this installment, I'll be joined by Jeremy Arnold, a film historian, commentator, and author of Christmas in the Movies and the book The Essentials, 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter. Together, we'll examine the many musical, mirthful, and melodramatic merits of the movie, how it has stood the test of time over the past 80 years, its brilliant songcraft, and much, much more. But I believe every main course should be preceded by a tasty appetizer. So before we commence with the main discussion, let's learn a bit more about how this film came to be made. Meet Me in St. Louis is a 1944 American Christmas musical film produced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The story unfolds through a series of seasonal vignettes beginning in the summer of 1903 and follows the Smith family's experiences in St. Louis as they prepare for the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition, also known as the World's Fair. Directed by Vincent Minnelli, the film stars Judy Garland, Margaret O'Brien, Mary Astor, Lucille Bremer, Tom Drake, and Leon Ames, among others. The screenplay, written by Irving Brecker and Fred Finkelhoff, was adapted from the Kensington Stories, a collection of family-centered tales by Sally Benson that were first published in The New Yorker and later released as a novel. While Arthur Freed and his team worked on developing the script, Minnelli, drawing on his expertise in set and costume design, focused on the film's visual style. Collaborating with designer Lemuel Ayers on sets and art director E. Preston Ames, Minnelli sought to evoke the essence of Thomas Eakins' artwork, which reflected the period in which the story is set. Garland, meanwhile, struggled during production. Dissatisfied with the script and lacking confidence in her role as the leading lady, she battled severe emotional challenges, a dependency on amphetamines, and physical ailments, including recurring migraines. Production records reveal frequent disruptions caused by Garland's emotional outbursts, chronic lateness, and occasional absences. At one point, she missed an entire week of filming, reportedly due to an ear infection. She also resisted Minnelli's rigorous schedule of rehearsals and pre-recording sessions in the months leading up to filming. However, the director eventually earned her trust, and the two developed a romantic relationship, living together during post-production and marrying soon after the film's release. Interestingly, a bit of trivia here, earlier in the production, Garland was briefly romantically involved with her co-star, Tom Drake. Principal photography began on December 1, 1943, and wrapped on April 7, 1944, running over schedule and pushing the final budget to nearly $1.8 million. The initial rough cut exceeded 2 hours, prompting the writers to suggest edits that trimmed the runtime to 113 minutes for its summer 1944 preview screenings. Positive audience reactions led MGM to delay the film's release until the Christmas season. With this film, Garland introduced 3 enduring musical standards: the Trolley Song, The Boy Next Door, and, of course, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, all composed by Hugh Martin and Ralph Blaine. Producer Arthur Freed also contributed to the soundtrack. Despite Garland's initial reluctance and some production challenges, the film was a critical and commercial success. Premiering in St. Louis on November 22, 1944, and later in New York, it became MGM's second highest grossing film of the year, surpassed only by Going My Way. It also became MGM's most successful musical of the decade. In 1994, the Library of Congress recognized the film as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and added it to the United States National Film Registry for preservation. Meet Me in St. Louis remains beloved today. It holds a 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a Metacritic score of 94, and an IMDb user rating of 7.5 out of 10. It's time now to have yourself a merry little original trailer.
Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. Ding, ding, ding went the bell. Zing, zing, zing went my heartstrings. From the moment I saw him, I fell.
Meet Me in St. Louis is the tender, romantic story of the most popular young beauty of the early 1900s, of her crush on the boy next door, of her lovable, yet at times humorous family.
If you like me like I like you, and we like both the same, I like to say it's very gay. I'd like to change your name. We will dance for hoochie coochie. You will be my tootsie woopsie if you will meet me in St. Louis, Louis. Meet me at the fair.
Okay, listen up. The talk ahead, it's going to be spoiler-tastic. That means my guest and I will be discussing key plot points and spilling the beans on how the narrative unfolds. So, not to get too bossy, but hey, you better catch up. You better watch Meet Me in St. Louis right now before going any further. Oh, hey, Esther, did you need something?
If there's anything I hate, loathe, despise, and abominate, it's a bully!
Sorry. You're right. My apologies. Folks, pretty pleased with a candy cane on top. Go watch the movie if you haven't seen it already. Next up, here comes Mr. Jeremy. A warm welcome now to our guest this month. He's a film historian, commentator, and author of several books, including Christmas in the Movies and The Essentials, 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter. You've also heard his voice on disc commentaries for classic films like Sudden Fear, The Holly and the Ivy, and The Lavender Hill Mob. It's Jeremy Arnold. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to Cineversary.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Eric. Great to be here.
I'm really glad you're here. I got a copy of the Christmas Movies book in my hand, and it's a fantastic book. All of the favorites are represented, and I couldn't think of a better guest this month to talk to about a real classic celebrating its 80th anniversary this year, Meet Me in St. Louis, which was actually released in November, but we're going to slate it for the December episode because, of course, it's more of a Christmas movie, and that's part of what we'll talk about here. I think you make a compelling argument in your book about that, so I want you to set a scene for us if you can remember. When and where did you first watch this film? Did you love it from that first watch, or have you come to appreciate the film more over time?
I did love it on first watch, and I have come to appreciate it more over time. So both are true.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly definitively the first time I saw the film, but I'm pretty sure it was either on television or VHS sometime in the 1980s. I would have been 12, 13, 14 years old, somewhere in there.
Okay.
I remember I really liked Gene Kelly. I liked Gene Kelly musicals. I loved the dance scene. And I think once I made my parents allow me to stay up late so I could watch Singing in the Rain. I mean, very nerdy. But I do remember that. And I remember being entranced by it and noticing the names involved and, for instance, wanting to see more Vincent Minnelli films because I'd seen his name on this one. But it really made a stronger impression on me in, I think it was the spring of 1989 when Janine Basinger screened it in her musicals class at Wesleyan.
I've interviewed her for our podcast. She's wonderful.
She is wonderful, and she was my teacher, my professor over 4 years at Wesleyan, and remains one of my best friends and colleagues. I worked with her on books. The first class I took with her was musicals, and it Oh, God, what an incredible course that was. The point is that Janine made me learn just how brilliant the film is as a musical and how innovative, which we can get into details more as we talk. But
Sure.
seeing it in the context of the history of the musical genre really did open my eyes to how special it was. And then when I was working on the Christmas movie book, I looked at it again through a new prism, that of Christmas time in movies, and I appreciated it on yet more levels.
Sure, I could totally get that. Wow, what a treat to have Jeanine Basinger as your professor. I'm envious, sir. I talked to her at length about It's a Wonderful Life for the 75th anniversary, and yeah, she was wonderful to talk to.
That's great.
But yeah, why? Let's get into it. Why is this film deserving of categorization, Jeremy, as a Christmas film? What makes it a great Christmas time movie?
Well, me in St. Louis is actually a really interesting test case if you're trying to define what a Christmas movie is.
Mhm.
Because Christmas isn't in it that much. It only comes about for the last 25 minutes of the 2-hour film. However, it carries so much meaning to the story, to the issues, the themes of the film, the characters, how they evolve and how they transform and grow. That's my definition of the term. It's any movie of any genre in which the Christmas season or some recognizable aspect of it is meaningful to the story, meaningful to the audience's experience of the story, and not just a movie set at Christmas or with Christmas as a backdrop. That isn't enough, or we'd have 6,000 Christmas movies. So even though Christmas is only in it for a quarter of the running time, it is a Christmas movie because of the meaning it imparts. It's also the culmination of the story, which is about family. And there's no time of year more about family than Christmas.
Oh yeah, right.
So having that setting, I think allows us to perceive even more meaning from the story than we otherwise would. If the film had resolved on Easter, it wouldn't really carry the same weight. Christmas arrives and it serves as a catalyst for the family problems to resolve, which is a very common Christmas movie device. Something about the season makes people resolve their problems, brings the lovers together, brings the friends together, whatever it might be. Reunites Santa with his elves.
Helps Bruce Willis conquer his enemies, etc.
Absolutely. And in that movie, what is his desire in that movie is not to kill the terrorists, it's to reunite with his wife and his family.
That's true. Yeah, it's so interesting because that's the age-long debate, right? Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? You, of course, include it in your book, and I think you make a pretty good argument for it. I can go on either side of the fence, but yeah, if you put it on in December, I'm not going to have a problem with it. I don't think anybody else should either.
I agree. I agree. I also want to say that there's another reason it's a Christmas movie, and that is simply because of the song, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. It's so indelible. It's so iconic. It is such a representation of Christmas time because it's so honest. It's not just a beautiful song, but it's full of wistfulness and darkness and longing, sadness. And these are all honest parts of the Christmas season. We all experience some degree of all of those things at some point every Christmas year. It's a time of reflection and so forth. Even if Christmas were in the film less than 25 minutes, if that song was there in that context, that would be enough to make it a Christmas movie because it's so famous and it comes back every year. I mean, we always hear Judy singing it somewhere in a shopping mall or wherever.
Yeah, and you'll continue to hear that song as a Christmas standard sung by many different artists covering it. But I love what you wrote in your book. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a quick excerpt in the book, Christmas in the Movies. You said, the 2.5 minutes of screen time in which Judy Garland sings Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas would be enough to catapult Meet Me in St. Louis to the front ranks of holiday classics. As it happens, the film devotes 25 minutes to the season, all of them set on Christmas Eve and all rich with meaning and a story built entirely around themes of family and nostalgia. The song's melancholic feel, conjuring loss and sorrow beneath the nostalgia, injects a dose of honesty into the film's image of Christmas, not to mention childhood. The meaning that the song imparts to the audience's experience of the story is significant enough to make this a genuine Christmas movie. I like what you say next. As a point of comparison, the Bob Hope comedy The Lemon Drop Kid from 1951 also introduced a top-notch holiday song to the world, Silver Bells. But the song carries no real meaning to the story or characters and therefore is not enough to make The Lemon Drop Kid a Christmas movie. Yeah, I kind of agree. Although I am a little partial to the Lemon Drop Kid. It's not breaking my heart that it's not in your book, but I see your point there.
First of all, I like the Lemon Drop Kid too. It's very funny, I wasn't meaning to denigrate it. But in terms of definition, sure, any movie that has Christmas in it in any way is fun to watch at Christmas time.
Sure.
It just is. But that can't be enough. In my mind, to really call it a Christmas movie. There wouldn't be anything really connecting them. It was more. I didn't even really want to do this book at first. It was it was suggested by my publisher and Turner Classic Movies. They wanted someone to do a Christmas film book, and at first I was like, Christmas movies.
Been there, done that, seen those.
Kind of fluffy, kind of like not that serious. But then I started to think about like what actually is a Christmas movie. And I started to realize that there were a great many interesting movies of different types and genres that really could be called Christmas movies. And yet, what was it that connected them? So I really enjoyed doing the book because I was sort of figuring out the answer to that question as I did it. And it was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. You could tell you had fun putting this together. And part of the fun is just deciding what makes the cut. There's always going to be debate. Should that have been included? Should this have not been included, etc. But again, that's part of the fun. And you spell it out really well in terms of the criterion that you just discussed with me, what makes a Christmas movie, what makes the cut, and you're pretty consistent with it. So yeah, I totally respect that. So meet me in St. Louis. You don't often find it in like a regular rotation, let's say on cable, unless it's Turner Classic Movies or something. But do you believe it should be in regular rotation as a must-watch during the holiday season? Should more people seek it out this time of year?
Well, I would say yes, I guess really for two reasons. One, it's exemplary craftsmanship. It's just such a beautifully designed, conceived, executed movie on every single level.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk more about this as we go along. But the main reason it should be part of the rotation is because it's about the most Christmassy thing there is, which is family. Most Christmas movies are about family to some degree. And of course, that makes sense. What do we all do at Christmas time? We get together with our families, maybe including with family members we haven't seen in a long time, or if we're younger, family that we see every day, but now it's in a new context. We can all relate to that. And, I get the feeling watching Meet Me in St. Louis that things are most wrong when there's family dissension, when the family isn't together. It's a lot like Little Women, actually. This film is very similar to Little Women.
Oh, absolutely. I immediately thought of that as well. Mm-hmm.
Both are period stories. Both are families, in Little Women, it's all girls. And in this film, it's daughters and a son, but it's really the daughters who are the main characters. So it feels like a family of women. And in both movies, the most important thing is family, and the family being strong and together and supportive of one another. Notably, Little Women incorporates Christmas too. It's in the novel for sure. And all the versions of Little Women have Christmas in them. Although I think the one in the 90s with Winona Ryder is the one that is most a Christmas movie, and is why I included it in my book.
It remains a blind spot. Yeah, I'll have to catch up to that one. I really love the Greta Gerwig version from, 5 years ago? But again, I haven't seen every iteration, but yeah, I will have to check it out.
Yeah, so really just the way Christmas enhances the idea of family is really key. And I think it would make it resonate every year with people.
You're right. All the great classics that we revisit time and again have to do with family. I mean, that's kind of the centerpiece. Anything from A Christmas Story to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, of course, Home Alone, It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street. You can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And there are some peripheral films, like you think of something like Nightmare Before Christmas. I think most people would consider it a Christmas film. A lot of others would consider it more of a Halloween movie. Nobody's wrong. But I agree that with the criterion of, the family at the center here. And I think this one absolutely fits that bill. And I'm kind of amazed because when I continue to recommend this film to people who haven't seen it or who have forgotten about it for a long time, even older people than me, and I'm 55, I continue to nominate it as, hey, you should watch it around the Christmas time season because it's actually a pretty feel-good Yuletide film, even though that's only maybe a quarter of the runtime that Christmas season is represented. But it just fits right in this time of year to me. And usually people will come back and say, you're right, that is a pretty good Christmas movie. I wouldn't have thought of that. And some others have said, yeah, it's not one I think of associated with the holidays. So to each his own, but I will continue to trumpet the cause of Meet Me in St. Louis as a worthy all-time great Christmas movie. So we should pivot here because there is so much to talk about, besides its merits as a Christmas or holiday film. What facets make this picture timeless and special? So if I can kick this off, I think we can agree. This is a magically nostalgic work. It's 1944. It provides this vision of what America could be again, I think, in that era, but also even today, to some extent. Obviously, 80 years is a long time. Many things have changed. But it does demonstrate that wistfulness, sentimentality, Americana, they can be powerful tools to tell a cinematic story and emotionally impact viewers. So to me, the film continually reminds us of a simpler, more innocent, more charmingly quaint time before any electronic form of popular entertainment, before automobiles to some extent, before modern technological conveniences, when family was the focus, when the limits of your fun were dependent on your imagination and resourcefulness.
I think you've hit on some really important points. It's interesting to me to use the word timeless to describe Meet Me in St. Louis, because time is a really important aspect to the movie and to its making, and even to the reason it became a movie. The 1940s were a decade that was defined societally in America by family, you could argue. The first half of the decade, World War II, millions of families were torn apart on a tremendous scale. Second half of the decade, the post-war period, families are trying to rebuild themselves, reconstitute, often without the return of those loved ones. So the families are permanently broken in some ways. So the result of that is that family was a big part of everyone's central focus during that entire decade. And by the way, which is why Christmas pops up in tons of movies of the 1940s, even movies that are not Christmas movies. It's used as a storytelling device to represent the family unit.
Yeah, you got quite a few films from that decade represented in your book. Absolutely.
It's the ultimate decade for Christmas in the movies, at least on the big screen. I know today things are a little different. But Arthur Freed, the producer, wanted to make a film that would conjure family unity, happiness, Americana before World War I, in a long ago, sort of faraway place. And in this case, 1902 St. Louis. So it's set in a specific long ago time, a different America, if you will, and it was made at a very specific new time in America, the America of the World War II era. And so now when we look back on it 80 years after that, it's sort of layered. We're looking at both eras in a sense, the era the film was made in and the era it's set in. And however you look at it, the ideas in the film are timeless, the dynamics and joys and problems of family life and family issues. I just think also that the tremendous loss that Americans were experiencing in the decade is also really well captured by the film. Yes, it was sold as a happy musical, and it is in large part, but it's also dark and wistful and sad,
right,
and lots of anxiety and worry about the future, which of course would also match what people were thinking during the war. This film was made and released during the war. So, home front audiences would have really found that these themes resonated. And the film was it was the second biggest grossing film for MGM up to that point.
Not only that, but the studio's most profitable picture since Gone with the Wind, which was 5 years earlier. And of course, this helped establish MGM's signature look and style for subsequent Technicolor musicals. You mentioned Arthur Freed. We should probably step back briefly and just catch our audience up. So again, Meet Me in St. Louis is one of the crown jewels in the cycle we now know as the golden age of the MGM musical that roughly began late 20s but continued through the early 60s. Now you have Arthur Freed coming aboard as head of what's called the Freed unit. He had served in different producer or associate producer roles for MGM, but suddenly he's promoted. So Meet Me in St. Louis is regarded as kind of the first Freed unit masterwork. This is what I'm reading from scholars, critics, historians.
Yeah.
That canon would later include Easter Parade, On the Town, Royal Wedding, An American in Paris, Singin' in the Rain, The Bandwagon, Brigadoon, Gigi, so many masterworks. But yeah, it's also, is it not, the film that establishes Vincent Minnelli as an A-list filmmaking talent, and it, of course, helps cement Judy Garland as a major box office draw on the heels of her star-making role in The Wizard of Oz 5 years earlier. It's not like she hadn't made a movie since The Wizard of Oz. She'd been making plenty of movies. But interestingly, the two met, Minnelli and Garland, during production. They fell in love. They had a baby, by the way, Liza Minnelli, and collaborated on 4 additional movies prior to their split up in 1951. So there's many reasons why this movie is significant. But yeah, as far as like its pedigree as a musical too, the music won an Oscar. It's among the most memorable song cycles in the Hollywood musical canon. Many of the tunes have become evergreen standards. You still hear the trolley song in clip shows and things like that, brought back, revived on Broadway. The Boy Next Door, of course, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. We hear this every year. 3 numbers written exclusively for the film, right? And so the latter song, you've already made a case for this. It was especially resonant to viewers in 1944, many of whom were missing their loved ones fighting overseas in the war, yearning for them to come home and be reunited with the family. But let's talk briefly about some of the other songs, because those are the big 3 that everybody talks about. But there's also the title song, Meet Me in St. Louis, Skip to Malou, Under the Bamboo Tree. These were turn-of-the-century standards that were period accurate for the time depicted in the story. But unlike many other contemporary musicals, Meet Me in St. Louis doesn't drown out the central narrative with a glut, if you will, of sung music, right? There are only about 7 or so complete songs performed by the cast. Of course, there's instrumental music, too. But like, let's say compared to a musical like Sound of Music, okay, one of the all-time greats. And I'm not going to besmirch any of the songs in there. Every one deserves its place in the Sound of Music. It is an absolute stone-cold, perfect movie to me as a musical. But it's almost wall-to-wall music. It's also longer. Here you have fewer songs that are sung and maybe more of a focus on narrative.
Everything you're saying gets at the genius and talent of Vincent Minnelli. I mean, this was only his 3rd film as director, which is rather astonishing. And his main innovation was really in integrating the numbers into the story so fully that they become really part of the overall story. They tell story.
Mm-hmm.
The film does not stop for the numbers, like, and nothing's happening during the number except the singing and dancing. No, there's still story being expressed.
Right.
Now, this had been done before, but not to the depth and fullness of this film, which does it from very beginning to the very end. What you say about the fact that there are relatively few songs in the film is something I've thought about. It's really interesting. First of all, the first thing Janine ever taught me in her first class, which was musicals, was that when you make a musical film, the central problem that every artist is confronting is how to make the audience accept the numbers. How do you accept the singing and dancing, the jump into unreality, from real to unreal?
The breaking out into song, which stops a lot of people cold.
Right.
In 2024, if you introduce somebody to a classic musical and they're just breaking out into song, improbably, some people just aren't going to buy it.
My point is that the films, they're not just breaking out into song. There are all sorts of techniques that are used to transform the narrative space into performance space so that in our minds, we accept that we're about to experience singing and or dancing. One way to do that is to have a musical number as close to the beginning of the movie as possible. Ideally, a musical opens with a number. And Meet Me in St. Louis does do this, but in a really interesting way. You've got the family members each singing a refrain of Meet Me in St. Louis, and they pass the song on from family member to family member.
Yes.
But they're not really singing it as a stylized performance. It's like they're just singing to themselves while they're walking through the house, as if any of us could.
And that's plausible to me. That makes sense.
Don't track up the floor now.
I won't. Oh, meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the... Don't tell me the lights are shining any place but there. We will dance the hoochie coochie. I will be your tootsie wootsie. Meet me in St. Louis.
Meet me in St. Louis, Louis. I'll be out in a minute, Agnes.
All right,
Meet
Grandpa.
me at the fair. Don't tell me the lights are shining any place but there.
The other numbers in the movie, it's not quite as organic to, let's say, the scene or how it segues into the song, but that's okay. But that's a great example.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about earlier in terms of how Meet Me in St. Louis helped innovate the classic film musical to some extent, this production skillfully integrates song lyrics into the dialogue, allowing both to collaboratively advance the narrative. Now, in most earlier musicals, Often the songs seemed arbitrarily placed, mainly to showcase the star's, let's say, vocal and dance abilities, right? But as you said, you recall how in spontaneous fashion, different members of the family begin singing the lyrics to the title song, which, by the way, is actually the official anthem of the Real World's Fair that came to St. Louis in 1904. But like you also consider, let's say, The Boy Next Door, all right, which perfectly summarizes Esther's growing feelings for the boy next door, John Truitt, the boy she saw outside a few moments earlier. That kind of makes sense to me that, of course, on the heels of seeing him and kind of flirting a little bit, she would start singing this song. It's more plausible to me. And then you ponder how Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas and its words, they fit the melancholy mood and the advice that Esther is offering Tootie in that scene. So I get exactly what you're saying here.
Yeah, I mean, that opening, it tells us that the entire world of this movie is a musical world.
Mm-hmm.
The opening tells us this. Characters will sing and hum, to themselves, to others, and that goes a long way towards sort of priming us to accept any other musical number that will come along. Also, the whole look of the film is so nostalgic and picture postcard.
Oh, sure.
It's unreal on many, many levels. And that is a really great device for a musical where you want people to accept unreality.
Yes, I mean, the narrative structure is segmented by the 4 different seasons, right? You have these tintype postcard visual intros that are used as framing devices.
Yeah.
I think it really provides a simple but effective way to tell the story of one family's growth and transition over a set period, which is, 1 year. So as each season progresses, so too do the characters, some of whom come of age more as time passes. And interestingly, the season that opens the story, summer, it comprises nearly half the runtime. There's a lot going on in that chapter. And spring, the 4th and final chapter, commands a mere 3 minutes, but it's okay. I don't think we're really keeping track, but yeah, I love the narrative structure and how, like you said, it's segmented. And of course, visually, the way it's constructed, it's a fabricated reality here. It's very much kind of a fantasy, a confection, Meet Me in St. Louis is, right? I mean, the times weren't like this for so many people. But again, it's part of the magic of the movies, the vibrant Technicolor on display. I mean, God, we could spend a whole episode just talking about the color, the Technicolor. It really pops. I wish I had a chance to see this on the big screen in a restored form. Had you ever seen it on the big screen? Just curious.
Janine showed it in 16 millimeter at Wesleyan, if that counts. But I have since seen it on the big screen, yes, but both in 35 and digital.
Yeah. But the filmmakers are able to create this idealized cinematic confection thanks to this chromatic palette provided by the old school Technicolor process, which can really wow you even all these years later in a really nice restored version on Blu-ray, etc. But what else makes this movie great? There isn't much of a plot here, let's be honest.
No.
Tension and conflict are relatively lacking compared to other movies, even other musicals, Not every song is instantly memorable as with some other classic musicals. But to me, what the film boasts an abundance of is emotional resonance, and that's courtesy of its, as I said, reliance on nostalgia, on homespun allure, on idealized depictions of domestic harmony and everyday life in an upper-middle-class American family from 120 years ago now. A household where the kids engage in relatively believable behaviors. They squabble, they scheme, they joke around, they pine for love, they have each other's back. So it feels like a believable kind of family dynamic to some extent. Again, very different times where it's very patriarchally ordered. We get that. But the Smith family dynamics, Jeremy, aren't they captivating? I mean, the children and the maid are often in collusion with these little white lies to fool their parents.
Would it start a minor revolution in this household if dinner was an hour early tonight?
Mr. Smith hates to eat early on a hot day.
Eating early on a hot day gives you more time to digest your food before retiring. Besides, I'm due at my sister's house 7 o'clock on a family matter.
Something wrong with your sisters?
Having trouble with her husband. Him being a man.
The patriarchal order dictates the family meal schedule, the table-side etiquette, major decisions like the choice to move. The maid is a fascinating character. She's this cherished family insider, but she's unafraid to sarcastically speak her mind. So, yeah, what do you like about the family dynamics here?
Well, I was just thinking that it is interesting how, yes, it's a patriarchal society and family and so forth in the way that the father rules the roost. But I think the film really pokes a lot of fun at this and kind of undermines it. For instance, one of the threads of the story is that one of the daughters wants to marry this guy from New York, and
Yeah, Warren.
yeah, Warren. And the father isn't aware of this. And then at the very end of the movie, he comes over on Christmas Eve and basically says,
Rose Smith, we can't go on like this any longer. I've positively decided we are going to get married at the earliest opportunity, and I don't want to hear any arguments. That's final. I love you.
I love you, and we're going to get married. And it's very funny because he does it in a very sort of aggressive way. But what does Leon Ames as the father do? He doesn't say, this is outrageous. She's too young. Get the heck out of here. Absolutely not. Go away. I forbid it. He just turns to her and says some version of congratulations, but I'd really like to meet him sometime. He's okay with it.
Yeah.
And that is very delightful for the audience because, of course, we're on the side of that happening as well.
Of course. I mean, the film suggests this clash between strong-minded women and the patriarchal order as represented by Papa. It also represents, it's fascinating on this recent rewatch, the reading of it to me came more clear, how men often fail at accurately reading women's signals.
Oh, yeah.
This happens so often in Meet Me in St. Louis. You remember how John Truitt compliments Esther?
Say, that is nice perfume.
Do you like it?
Uh-huh.
It's essence of violet. I save it for special occasions.
Exactly the kind my grandmother uses.
Or how
Yes.
Papa stubbornly insists on moving the family to New York without carefully considering, of course, the relocation's impact on the women in his family. It's obvious, Jeremy, that the females rule this roost.
Absolutely.
They raise the kids.
Yep.
They solve most of the problems. And Father Smith is kind of more of a figurehead of the household who's given proper respect, but not the center of the Smith clan. And tellingly, when Tootie is tended to after her injury, remember, on Halloween night, what does Anna tell her daughters?
Shall I call Pop at the office?
Oh, good heavens, no, don't call your father. What can he do?
Now, one reading of that is, he might spank you or something, but I think it's more, he's kind of ineffectual. Like, it suggests that Papa doesn't have the proper nurturing or healing skills.
Yep.
So there's all kinds of interesting thematic themes underfoot in Meet Me in St. Louis. Obviously, one right-in-your-face reading of the film stresses the importance of traditional and conservative family values, of staying true to your roots, of navigating challenging familial dynamics. So long as the family remains cohesive, it doesn't matter what happens in life is kind of the main takeaway here. But a further timeless message is also relatively obvious. It's there's no place like home, which is a message shared by Garland's earlier film, of course, The Wizard of Oz. And that's echoed, is it not, in her closing remarks where she says, I can't believe it, right here where we live, right here in St. Louis. As far as themes, is there anything else that stands out to you?
In listening to you talk about the father and how he's treated, I was just thinking that's yet another parallel to Little Women, in which the father, he barely exists in the story, in the novel and the films. So it's similar in that one he's absent, and in this one, in a way, he's absent too, because he doesn't know what's going on a lot of the time. He's kind of a dumbbell. It takes him forever to figure out what he finally figures out at the end when everyone else has already gotten there.
But it's kind of necessary, is it not? Because
yes,
otherwise the expectation is the patriarch has to exert his authority.
Yeah.
And so the father figure in these stories has to take a back seat. Otherwise, it's not really a female-centric picture. And just because I call it a female-centric picture doesn't mean it doesn't appeal to males, that men won't enjoy it. I'm a man. I certainly enjoy this movie, but I get it, and there are families like that where you have kind of a figurehead of a father as opposed to an iron-fisted authoritarian. So it is kind of charming how the father will stick out his chest and try to exert his authority a little bit, but it becomes almost a comic relief joke.
Yeah, and something else is that in this era, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s of Hollywood, that golden era, the movies were made and enjoyed by everyone. It's not like today where it's segmented into quadrants, male, female, old, young.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would go see Meet Me in St. Louis. Kids, adults, fathers, mothers.
Totally true. I mean, you consider, you already brought up, World War II is raging at the time. So the movie made viewers appreciate what we were fighting for, the preservation of the American family, all the precious values that we as a nation held dear at that time. So I think the movie intends to make people remember the importance of family unity and happy, secure domestication. So in 1944, you think, okay, who's going to see Meet Me in St. Louis? Well, it probably would have touched viewers and families eager to see an end to the war, right? But also, if any homesick soldiers saw it, they probably would have watched it and been just as moved as well.
Yeah.
Being that it was a musical with a primarily female cast, I'm sure it would have likely appealed primarily to female viewers. But again, I think it's an equal opportunity musical. And I think that the film's key message is be true to your roots. As we said, honor thy father and mother, continue the family conventions in familiar settings. Maybe they don't resonate as powerfully among modern audiences. Viewers today, younger people, see this and they're not going to likely be inspired to marry the boy next door. They're not going to buy a single-family home in the neighborhood they grew up in necessarily. They may not have 3 generations living under the same roof or live life as mom and dad and grandpa do. But I think the simple values on display, the fantasy of having a normal, close-knit family, the sentimental Americana imagery, it could still pack a punch. It can make a contemporary watcher feel wistful for these things they've likely never experienced. I can relate to this, Jeremy. In watching the movie, I have absolutely no association with any of this. I didn't obviously grow up in this era, neither did you. I doubt anybody's still alive who grew up in 1904, let alone 1944, fewer and further between. But again, even though we may have never experienced a family like this, I still gravitate toward because, I don't know, it's such a feel-good movie for all the reasons we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, in 1944, the contemporary audiences would have actively been linking the movie to the loss that they felt, the anxiety about the future and what was going to happen with the rest of the war. Today, of course, people who see the film, we're not thinking that at all because we're in 2024. So what remains? What remains is what you just said, a depiction of family and the way that resonates across generations, across times. Maybe they're wearing different clothes and talking in slightly different language and interacting in different ways than we do now. But if you put all that surface stuff aside, it's still family, the dynamics of family, and they're exactly the same.
Yeah, totally agree. And just as a quick aside, and I just had to mention, again, Margaret O'Brien gives a great performance here. To me, Meet Me in St. Louis persists as a fascinating study of childhood precociousness because not only Tootie, but also Agnes, right? They possess this morbid curiosity. They speak in candidly strong words. I'm really surprised for a 1944 movie. They talk about violence toward people and animals. I get it. They're not going to act on it. But through the lens of playful pretending and juvenile imagination. But it's interesting that an ultra-family-friendly studio like MGM would have greenlit a movie featuring ghoulish-minded, death-obsessed child characters like these. They almost cause a trolley to derail that could have killed several people, and then the family's just joking about it. Remember how the maid is kidding Agnes about kicking her cat down the stairs.
Katie, where's my cat? Where is she?
I don't know. A while back she got in the way and I kicked her down the cellar steps. I could hear her spine hit on every step.
Oh, if you've killed her, I'll kill you. I'll stab you to death in your sleep, and then I'll tie your body to 2 wild horses till you're pulled apart.
It's pretty specific imagery here.
I love when she says, I'm bringing all my dolls to New York. The dead ones, too.
Yeah, I mean, so many great lines.
She's a horrible ghost, and I'm a terrible drunken ghost. She was murdered in a den of thieves, and I died of a broken heart. I've never even been buried because everyone's scared to come near me. We'll fix him fine. It'll serve him right for poisoning cats.
Does he poison cats?
He buys meat, and then he buys poison, and then he puts them all together.
And then he burns the cats at midnight in his furnace. You can smell the smoke. That's horrible.
And Mr. Brokoff was beating his wife with a red-hot poker.
I never would have believed it.
And you know something else?
Don't tell. You crossed your heart you wouldn't tell.
I crossed it with my left hand. Mr. Brokoff has empty whiskey bottles in his cellar.
But I love this because it pushes the envelope just a bit. It's not this saccharine, sweet character. Yes, she's cute as a button. It's almost too perfect, the casting of Margaret O'Brien in some ways. During the scene where she's being sung to by Judy, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and if you read up a little bit, that Margaret O'Brien was one of the great criers of her era. Those tears look absolutely real, and I absolutely believed it. And it brought a little tear to my eye, too, because, wow, I just got caught up in the emotion of not only the character being emotional, but the actress herself. Anything you want to say about that actress here?
In the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, where she's crying, especially after the song when she's whacked off the heads of the snowmen and Judy's consoling her, you there's something really moving about the fact that Tootie is releasing all this emotion and inner turmoil when throughout the rest of the movie she's, she puts a funny face on things. She seems tougher, she seems more sarcastic, and yet underneath all that is this real emotion of a little girl. And I always find it really moving. It also underscores something that I think is really overlooked in this film, and that is Judy Garland's acting. We think of her singing and also the way she looks in the film, but that scene with the snowman is really a tour de force of acting for Judy Garland, because what is she doing? She's trying to console her sister, but she's really trying to console herself as well. She's trying to comfort her, but doesn't really believe what she's saying. There's a lot going on there. And it's just a great example of also integrating the musical numbers with the reality narrative scenes, because we've just had the song "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and then immediately after we have this really intense, dramatic moment, and both moments feel totally at home to us and convincing, even though they literally follow each other. So that's a really great way to look at the way the film goes back and forth so believably.
Well said. Yes, I totally agree.
Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas didn't really become a standard for several more years.
Wow.
I think not until Frank Sinatra made a recording in the 50s. When he recorded it, Ralph Blane and Hugh Martin, they actually changed the lyrics even more. We didn't really talk about this, but as originally written, the song had very, very dark lyrics. And Judy Garland said, I can't sing this. The audience will think I'm a monster. You have to lighten it up. And they refused until Tom Drake finally talked them into it. And I think there's a nice compromise in the fact that Judy still sings it with great wistfulness and sadness. So the original meaning of the song still comes through.
I think one of the original lines from that song, if my memory serves correct, is something like, "It could be your last Christmas." I'm paraphrasing, but it was so dark, and she's singing it to this 7-year-old girl. It's like, come on, really? So of course they had to change that.
Yeah, and Hugh Martin in the 50s, he rewrote it yet again for Frank Sinatra. And it's kind of ironic because he chose to write it to make it even more sunny when he didn't want to change it at all to begin with. So he really came around, but I like the Judy Garland version the best.
Oh, yeah. Her original here, it's just right on the money. I mean, it's perfect for the scene. It's Judy Garland. I mean, come on, how can you improve on Judy Garland? And it's the original. That should be in heavy rotation on the Christmas music channels this time of year, too. So
one little piece of trivia that I found very entertaining is that in the song "The Boy Next Door," as far as I know, this song has more repeated notes than any other song. When she's singing, there are street addresses.
I live at 5135 Kensington Avenue, and he lives at 5133.
Every single syllable is the same note.
Yeah.
For 24 notes in a row. If anyone out there can find a song that has more than 24 repeated notes, I would love to hear about it. Contact me on social media and let me know. The other thing I love is that the trolley song, the way this song came about is really interesting. The songwriter Ralph Blane had been doing a lot of research into 1904 St. Louis, and he was looking through an actual newspaper from St. Louis in 1904, and he saw a cartoon of a trolley car, and it had the caption, "Clang, clang, clang goes the jolly little trolley." And immediately he heard the chorus in his head and wrote the song in about 3 hours.
That's amazing. I saw the featurette on the Blu-ray. I recall. That's a great story.
That was the immediate breakout hit of the movie, by the way. It was not "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas."
I think they in fact released it before the film came out, didn't they?
I think you're probably right about that. Yes.
I'm so glad you brought up the trolley song, because many people consider it rightfully the centerpiece of the movie. I just think it's a perfect little masterclass in how to do a movie musical song. Every element comes together and coalesces. The lyrics are brilliant. The cinematography, the color, everything works so well in that song.
It has such propulsive energy where most of the rest of the film doesn't. It's like a burst of this kind of energy. And so it's really welcome, I think, when it appears, because it's so different from what we've seen up to that point.
Yes. It's the greatest example in the film of something that I can relate to, being a teenager once upon a time and having a crush on somebody. And I really feel it emotionally. from the Esther character. And that song in particular, the combination of the lyrics and the exuberance with which she sings the song, and when she says the line, "the universe reels," something really strikes a chord in me, and it takes me back to, yes, when I was that age and I had a crush on somebody, that's how the world felt. And then suddenly he appears on the trolley. It's a very meet-cute thing, not like real life necessarily, but it just feels so right. I don't know how else to express it, Jeremy, but again, the trolley song is that perfect epitome of adolescent crush.
Yeah, because the sources of drama and tension in the movie are, on one level, minor things. You know, who's going to take who to the dance? Will the boy next door like me?
Yes.
Will this person propose?
Right.
And yet, when you're a young person, these things are hugely consequential, and they're the most important thing in your world.
Right.
And then later, as adults, we get a little more context. So, in that sense, the movie, I think, captures it really well. It makes minor events feel major.
Yes. And put another way, in a simpler way, it just makes me feel younger again.
Yes, that
It takes
too.
me back to that place when I was a teenager, when I was Esther's age. But I can relate to it putting myself in the shoes of the parents now, right? Having kids in college at this age. So you can look at it through the lens of different characters at different points in your life, too. I want to talk briefly here about the director, Vincent Minnelli, and what he brings to the film. Here I'm going to quote, this is critic Emmanuel Levy. He makes a case for how the director imprints a strong creative stamp on this work. And he says, in his third film and first masterpiece, Minnelli fuses brilliantly all the elements of a musical, songs, performances, cinematography, decor, and costumes, in service of his singular vision. Stylistically, the film demonstrates Minnelli's fluid camera, relying on swirling movement and smooth dissolves, rather than sharp cuts and montage, which is more the Busby Berkeley style. Levy also credits Minnelli and his collaborators with infusing the production with thought-provoking thematic underpinnings. He continues, I'll quote him here, he says, taking a mythical approach, the film tries to reconcile the dichotomies of art versus reality, stability versus change, small-town America versus the big city, extended versus nuclear family, east and west, past and present. At the end, the World Fair becomes both a dream image and hometown reality for the Smiths family. So anything you want to say here about Minnelli and his filmmaking choices?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember that Vincent Minnelli started as a designer. He had a background in art direction, production design, costume design. Before he even entered show business, he worked as like a window dressing artist. That's the key to Minnelli, is style and decor and costume, color, lighting, the look of the production. And Meet Me in St. Louis is Minnelli operating on all cylinders, because every single facet of the production that I just mentioned is perfectly attuned to the story and emotion that he's trying to express in the story.
Right.
You know, the decor, the costumes, they carry meanings for him. It's the way he thought of expressing character, just sort of inherently.
Yeah, that's a very believable household, just in terms of like period authentic accoutrement and decor. Of course, I'm no expert.
Yeah.
I have to trust that this is period accurate. But you could tell, based on what you were saying in terms of his previous roles in film, the skills and the repertoire he brings with him to Meet Me in St. Louis. The attention to detail is obvious, right? And that's part of the charm of this movie, the color, the way things pop, but also the littlest details in the background, within the set, within the different rooms of the home, for example, even during the parties and the dance sequence. Everything just looks like he has his fingerprints on it.
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is that the musical numbers, they look pretty much like the non-musical scenes. There isn't a big shift in lighting. There isn't some big sudden camera movement when a number starts.
Yeah.
And that helps us accept them as a perfectly normal part of that world. You know, when Judy starts singing The Boy Next Door, the lights don't shift. She's just already in a performance space, because the entire movie is a performance space. So she can just start singing,
Right.
and everything else stays the same. The other thing is that Minnelli worked with his cinematographer on this, George Folsey, to create some really brilliant shots. And my favorite is a really long and uninterrupted take that I didn't notice for the first many times that I saw the film. And then I realized, oh my God, this shot is like 2.5 minutes long. And it's the scene where Judy Garland and Tom Drake are turning off the gas lights
Oh, yeah.
in the house after the party. If people watch that again, Just notice how long that shot goes before there's a
It's
cut.
incredible. It's a masterclass right there. Just a little movie within a movie.
It's complicated. There's a lot of movement.
Sure.
The camera's moving, they're moving, the lights are
Yep.
dimming, and that has to be adjusted in real time. I mean, it's very complex.
Absolutely. I mean, the director deserves praise for so many smart creative decisions. But yeah, that mesmerizingly memorable sequence, as you said, where John helps Esther turn off the house lights. It flaunts these incredible shadows, contrasting with eye-catching colors. That's what I'm really amazed about, is the Technicolor still pops even when the lights get turned down.
Yeah.
But just going back to what you were talking about, Judy Garland, you can make a case this is her finest moment on film. Obviously, everybody's going to remember Wizard of Oz. There's A Star is Born to reconcile with. It's a great performance there. So many other ones. But to me, I don't know, this could be her finest moment. What does Minnelli do? Well, his camera, it purposefully lingers long on the youthful beauty of his future bride, who probably never looked as radiant or ravishing before or after in a motion picture, in my opinion. You recall how he maintains that surprisingly long, you talk about unbroken shots, but the boy next door in the open window shot there, it goes on for quite a while as well. One of the movie's finest moments is also the lengthy backward tracking shot showing the apprehensive Tootie approaching Mr. Brokoff's home. It allows us to study her increasingly frightened face, right? I love that whole Halloween sequence so much. But yeah, that shot in particular, another example where he's unafraid to, let the camera linger for a while. Another standout visual involves Esther dancing with her grandfather. You see this duo waltzing in a circular pattern, and then they disappear behind this gigantic Christmas tree, only to reemerge as John and Esther. I mean, it's cute.
Yeah.
But it's also visually just such an interesting choice to me, where you do so much without saying a word. That's the magic of the movies to me, a shot like that. Minnelli favors economical storytelling in a few examples. I'm going to give you one. You think about when John and Esther start talking about marriage, but they don't show him proposing. They could have shown him getting down on his knees, and wouldn't that have been romantic and all this nostalgia evoked, etc. But they don't do that. Now they're talking about the ins and outs of, is this going to work? But it's already happened. So some things happen off screen here too, which is the mark of an economical filmmaker.
Yeah. Minnelli, I mean, he was a great director in that he always kept the audience focused on the story and the characters and the real essence, the spine of the film in every shot, really. He directed movies in many genres. We think of him primarily as a musical director, and I think probably most of his movies were musicals, but he did some very other notable, dramas, melodramas, and so forth. In terms of Judy Garland, you were asking if I think this is her best performance. I agree with you. I think this is. And she's at her peak. Her voice is at its peak. She, as you say, she's never looked more radiant or beautiful. And a lot of that, I'm sure, has to do with the fact that she was falling in love with Vincent Minnelli as she was making the film.
Yeah.
It's ironic because she didn't even want to do the film at first. She was tired of playing teenagers. I think she was 22.
That's right. She's tired of being in the Andy Hardy movies and always being some kind of adolescent love interest. And suddenly and I guess she had been in a film just prior to this where finally she's a more mature, a little bit older woman, taken a little more seriously and not this, teeny bopper. And suddenly she's asked, okay, why don't you play this presumably 17-year-old? You're going to have an older sister too, and didn't really like that idea.
Yeah, no, she didn't, and Louis B. Mayer had to personally talk her into it, basically. And then she always said after it was her favorite role of her career.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks for itself. And also Liza Minnelli, her daughter, says as much as well.
My friend Patricia Kelly, who is Gene Kelly's widow, has told me, and she said publicly, that Gene Kelly considered Meet Me in St. Louis the best musical ever made. It was his favorite.
Oh, wow. Wow. And, of course, he's going to be humble. I mean, come on. It's Singing in the Rain and American in Paris, so he's being humble there. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah. She said that Gene would watch Meet Me in St. Louis and weep. He got very emotional with it, and he just thought it was so perfectly done.
If you think of films before, you correctly said it. I mean, Little Women from 1933, and it's, of course, been reinvented many times. But you immediately, that comes to mind, right? It's also a tale about a female-centric household with several independent-minded daughters. But then I think of, so before Meet Me in St. Louis, what are some movies that maybe the filmmakers were inspired by a little bit, even subconsciously maybe? I think The Magnificent Ambersons from 1942. It's a similar study of how technology inevitably changes the American family. And then the same year, 1942, Holiday Inn. It's also segmented into different chapters based on holidays or seasons. Can you think of anything else as a predecessor?
I mean, I think more about the movies that came after it that are similar. Life with Father, and there are
Yes.
lots of movies in the 40s about Americana, period pieces
Yeah.
of families back on the plains or wherever. So this seems to me more of a forerunner to those, but I agree with the ones that you mentioned for sure.
Yeah.
Even the Andy Hardy movies, even though they're a totally different tone, it's about family,
Of
it's
course.
about issues of family. So that's part of it.
It's all fair game, no question about it. But yeah, as far as succeeding films and musicals that may have taken a cue from Meet Me in St. Louis, just chronologically, I kind of put a few on paper here. A State Fair from 1945. You did mention Life with Father from 47. Cheaper by the Dozen from 1950. On Moonlight Bay. I've not seen this from 1951, but it comes up when you do a little bit of digging. The Music Man from 62, certainly some of those family values. The Sound of Music, a lot of different films that may have been inspired by Meet Me in St. Louis. So it is Meet Me in St. Louis's 80th birthday. Birthdays are a time for giving presents, only it's the movie lovers who continue to receive the gifts. So, Jeremy, what is this film's greatest gift to viewers? What would you say?
Oh, I would say its depiction of, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but its depiction of family and
Mm-hmm.
the honesty through with which it depicts it, even though it's such a storybook long ago, unrecognizable in some ways, time. The honesty about the highs and lows of the family is linked, I think, really strongly to the highs and lows of Christmas time that we all feel every year. And so I actually think it's a perfect Christmas time movie.
Yeah, well said. Here's my take on an answer to this question. What is the greatest gift? Well, at a time when many people criticize the dangers of living in the past, they frown on cinematic sentimentality. That's a bad word, being sentimental in the movies. The film's entire premise celebrates nostalgia and its feel-good effect. I'm okay with that. Today, the media and popular culture often reinforce how different we are generationally, how it's healthy and necessary to break from your parents' unhip, outdated values and traditions. But Meet Me in St. Louis suggests that being in a loving family is perhaps what's most important, as you were saying, and that family dysfunction is not a universal experience. Yes, there are some tensions and conflicts that happen to the Smith family, but it's a movie, it's a confection. There's relatively little family dysfunction, but it doesn't have to be a universal experience. It doesn't have to be a mess in every movie you see. It also teaches us that you need not have lived in 1944 or 1904, for that matter, to appreciate all the things we've talked about, the movie's themes, the characters, the music, the values. I think these represent some pretty great gifts for an 80-year-old film that's set 120 years ago.
Yes, that's well said. And I want to add that there's one number that I think really encapsulates all of this perfectly. It's my favorite scene in the movie. I could easily pick Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas or the Halloween sequence is my favorites because
Yeah.
so wonderful. But my favorite is a little number called You and I, which is sung by Mary Astor and Leon Ames in the living room as Mary Astor plays the piano. Now, the family has just had a big argument and everyone has just sort of slinked away to their own rooms because they're also depressed by the fact that they have to leave St. Louis. And
Right.
so Mary Astor, she brings the family back together through song. She sits at the piano. She starts playing an old standard that Leon Ames recognizes, and he walks over and starts singing. And as he sings and then she sings with him, each other family member slowly comes back into the room, and the family is visually and in other ways reunited through music. And it's a beautiful song about togetherness. It had actually been written by Arthur Freed.
Right. And in fact, that's his voice.
And it's his voice dubbing Leon Ames. Right.
Yeah.
So it's very poignant.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is a wonderful moment. So, yeah, what are you currently working on, Jeremy, that listeners should know about? And for that matter, where can we follow you online? Do you want to direct anybody anywhere?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter for the time being, but also on Blue Sky, which I just joined.
Okay.
Look for my name. I've recorded several Blu-ray audio commentaries within the last year that have just come out.
Oh, share, please.
Yeah, so one is a film I'm really fond of called Plunder Road, which is a 1957 film noir heist movie.
Mm-hmm.
Really good, really low budget, tough little film. That was released by Kino. And then for the British label Indicator, I did one for Mysterious Intruder, which is part of the Whistler series with Richard Dix, and a film called Airhawks from 1935 with Ralph Bellamy as sort of a mad scientist melodrama. And I'm about to record one for the Anna May Wong film Dangerous to Know.
Interesting. Okay.
Very wonderful, sophisticated film from 1938. And otherwise, I might next be doing a book on a Western called Day of the Outlaw, which was made in the late 50s for a series of little monographs about Westerns that University of New Mexico Press is putting out. It's not official yet, but I think it'll probably be the next thing. And more immediately, I'll be in Washington, D.C. over Christmas time, and I'll be appearing at the American Film Institute Silver Theater in Silver Spring in the days before Christmas, introducing many screenings of classic Christmas movies, including Meet Me in St. Louis.
Oh, how fun and timely. Wow, you are a busy guy and quite a diverse array of projects you got going on there. So I love your commentaries on movies. I'll continue to seek those out. And, of course, your books, too. So lots of good things to look forward to there, Jeremy. Well, this was so much fun reminiscing with you about the many, many merits of Meet Me in St. Louis. I want to thank you again for peeling back its multiple layers and making a strong case for why this deserves to be in your Christmas watch rotation, folks. Make it happen. I mean, it's a movie that certainly is fitting this time of year. Happy holidays to you and yours, Jeremy. Thanks again for appearing on Cineversary.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks again for having me. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Nice conversation there with Jeremy Arnold, who you can tell is a huge champion for this film and an expert on its production and craftsmanship. Jeremy, thanks again. Did you know that Cineversary has its own website? That's right, we actually now have a vanity URL that's easy to remember, which will take you to a freshly designed portal where you can quickly access the latest episode of your favorite podcast, as well as all of our previous installments. Now it's a lot easier to spread the good word about our show to your friends and family. You simply tell them to visit Cineversary.com. Pretty simple, right? That's Cineversary.com. We also have a custom email address just for you. Now, if you ever want to share feedback on our show or offer suggestions for future installments, or maybe you just have a question about Cineversary, send it to us at cineversarypodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary show to your peeps. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us to get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, some of these other services, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that link, and leave a review and or rating. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Twitter. Our handle is @CineversaryPod, where you can easily tweet or follow us. And if you want to go an extra step in your support of our show and help keep us ad-free, please consider making a monetary donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate-cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, have you checked out my Cineverse Group website? Yeah, it's easy to get confused by these similar sounding names, Cineversary, Cineverse, Tomato. But Cineverse is actually the name of my private film discussion group I founded back in 2005 that continues to meet weekly on Zoom. Every week, the Cineverse group watches, researches, and discusses a different movie, and I create a summary write-up, call it a mini essay if you will, on that movie that gets posted to the Cineverse group blog. So if you want to enjoy reading in-depth content that examines different discussion-worthy motion pictures, including classic Hollywood films, independent features, foreign masterworks, modern movies, and silent-era standouts, then visit cineversegroup.com, simply spelled CINEVERSE group.com. Fun fact, every posted article on cineversegroup.com includes a link to a recording of our group discussion of that particular film, with me leading the conversation as moderator. So if you like what I'm doing on the Cineversary podcast, you might also want to give a listen to some of our Cineverse Group recordings, which are podcasts of a different sort. Again, head over to cineversegroup.com, where you can check out some interesting text and audio content on a variety of films, not necessarily celebrating a milestone anniversary. Riddle me this, listeners. What's the best romance film of the last 30 years? Which modern cinematic love story do critics and fans alike gravitate to time and again? And what's the movie that made many of us sit up and take serious notice of the talents of filmmaker Richard Linklater? The answer to all these questions? That's the film we'll be showcasing in January when we salute Linklater's Before Sunrise, which marks a 30th birthday next month. Until then, I remain your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies. They're not getting older, they're getting tootsie-wootsier, whatever that means. Thanks for giving us a listen, and happy holidays, one and all.